Hello and welcome to this session of Remote 8 2020. I hope that you're here to hear about how to be agile remotely because that is the topic of my presentation today. I'm going to just share my slides with you guys. Do you see my slides? I hope so. Okay, here we go. My name is Molood Ceccarelli. I am the founder and CEO of Remote Forever. I also work as an agile coach, which means that I am in the trenches of companies that are transforming to agile ways of working and are distributed on a daily basis. Remote Forever was started with an online conference, just like this one, or actually a little bigger and more pronounced than this one, because this one was put together very quickly. But nonetheless, it started with an online conference because I was the first person who challenged the idea of co-location as a requirement to being agile. And I proved that by putting together a fully online experience of bringing thought leaders of agile and remote working together in this Remote Forever Summit that happened 3 years ago for the first time. You can, of course, follow me on social media on the handles that you can see below, but without further ado, let's get to this presentation. Let's just start with a question. Where do you go to get real work done? I'm talking to you. Go to the chat box and let me know. Where do you go to get real work done when you want to be focused and productive and really get work done? This question was asked from 10,000 people in a survey. Out of all those 10,000 people, the answer, the office during the workdays is where I am most productive, said no one. And yet, we know that many business owners are investing so much money, like millions of money every year in real estate, providing beautiful office spaces for people to commute to and work from. Why is that? Why is it that there are so many business owners still resisting the idea of remote working? Let's look at some data. But before that, I'm going to show you with data why the idea of remote working is becoming more popular and why the idea of agile is becoming more popular and what I do and my company does as a unique proposition that we have, which is bringing these two together. This is the data that you can see here is from the latest State of Agile report, which is published a few times every year. This number is actually quite interesting right there. About 97% of the respondents report that they are using some sort of agile practice and method in their companies. That is a really high number. This other report is by Gartner. It was actually published just a few days ago, which means that it was in the middle of the pandemic where lots of countries are locked down and many people are forced to work from home. And the interesting thing is, as so many jobs suddenly became remote, this survey found out that 3 in every 4 CFOs have decided to keep these suddenly remote positions as permanently remote even after the situation is over. That means the willingness to have remote companies has suddenly increased like nothing before. So distributed companies are becoming agile, and agile companies are becoming distributed. Principle number 6 of the Agile Manifesto talks about how the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversations. There is no doubt to that, but that is precisely the principle that I challenged a few years ago, and I decided to bring remote working into the world of Agile because I did recognize that remote working was the reality that our world was living in. And now many of those people who resisted the idea are finding themselves in the middle of a situation where they have to work remotely and they don't necessarily have the skills of. So I hope that this conference and many other sources of information that are available for you would help you if you are one of those people. Let's look at some of the benefits of remote working for employers. I won't go into the details of that, but I want you to have a glimpse of it, that it's not just cost saving that is driving many employers to go remote. It's also the fact that employers are finding more productivity in their work, and access to top talent all around the world is another reason. Many people are accomplishing more in less time, and so many of these people feel just as connected to their colleagues as they were before, and some of them even feel more connected as they start working remotely. But what about face-to-face or water cooler conversations? This is a question I get from many managers that I work with. And I think this is the best answer that Christopher Nall has put together to that question. He says, if people running into each other in the hallway is the only way problems are solved in your organizations, you have bigger problems than whether or not people are working remotely. I couldn't agree more with that. Uh, let's look at some of the benefits for employees. Personal cost saving is obviously one of them. Increased productivity is another. And better sleep, healthier bodies, better habits of taking care of yourself and your family and your pets and your kids. And of course, being able to get your work done from a mobile device. This is true for so many people. If you are a developer, chances are, if the infrastructure in your company is built in a resilient way and in a secure way, you also can work from a laptop, from anywhere, any network that you want. But of course, many companies are not there yet. But still, those people who are not dependent on a secure network from a physical environment have reported that they are indeed able to do at least half of their work from a mobile device. I want to talk to you a little bit about me and my life. Well, my life has been remote for a very long time. I get to work from beautiful places. I get to communicate with my colleagues and with my clients who are usually distributed companies. And this has been a life of privilege. But also, my family is distributed. We live in 5 different countries and we come from 7 different nationalities. So my entire family is like a remote group of people, and we have learned through trial and error, through experiences, how to build deep connections with each other, even though we don't live in the same location and even though we don't necessarily talk the same languages. But I am one of those people who is on the extreme. Even my wedding had an element of remote. Some people participated in my wedding remotely. This is a picture of me right after the ceremony, as one of the guests was congratulating me because he had just seen the ceremony being performed. And I know that this is a unique life. I know that many of you may not be in this situation. And I know that some of you might suddenly have found yourself in a remote working situation and not quite know how to get comfortable with this. But that is why I'm here, and that is why you are in this presentation. This is a fundamental thing to think about. Work is what we do. It's not a place we go to. This sentence is from Jürgen Appeler, the creator of Management 3.0. And I think this is super important as a mindset to remember that you don't go to work as in go to a physical space, but rather you get work done from wherever you are. Being agile remotely. So we're going to the agile part of the presentation. Agile software development is often represented with this picture, which is actually quite false because this is a picture that shows the process that's called Scrum. That is only one of the agile processes. There are so many of them. And to some people, this is what Agile is. But to some others, this is what Agile is. Actually, many Agile coaches that I work with and I know who don't necessarily work remotely, they think without Post-its and physical walls and people in the same room, they almost feel disabled and they can't get their work done. But the reality is that Agile is such a, it's a much bigger mindset and phenomena that has happened. It's a paradigm that we have shifted into. Of course, it started from software development, This Agile Manifesto for Software Development was made in 2001, and it focuses on 4 different values. So throughout the rest of this presentation, I will walk you through those 4 values, what they mean, and what are some of the myths around them, and what is it that is stopping us from bringing those beautiful values into our remote organizations, and how we can overcome those challenges. Top challenges of being agile remotely and how to overcome them. Are you ready for this part? Let's go. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools is the first value that we're going to talk about. I think that the main challenge is that we think that we need real-time collaboration. We talk about time zone differences, bad internet connection, all those tools for chat and task management. We talk about all the lack of information transparency and how we don't have effective processes. And we make more meetings about those tools and about those processes. And we just keep adding to our backlogs, to our tool set, to our stack. And of course, at the end of the day, we say, it's not us, it's not the fault of Agile, it's actually remote work that is at fault. It's those people who sit in another country who are at fault. But how to overcome this challenge? Well, I say this many times. Stop trying to copy collocated behavior. You must think and behave differently when you are in a distributed team. Real-time communication is overrated and is often unnecessary. So instead of calling for yet another meeting or having someone chat with you constantly in order to create a real-time conversation, rethink the idea that you have about why you want to have that conversation. Is it because you want to tell them something? If that's the case, just write it down and send them an email. Or record yourself on video and send them a video. Rethink the fact that you do not necessarily need real-time conversations all the time. And that's the way that you can actually prioritize individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So if you can't solve the problem without a meeting, don't add a but to it. Just solve the goddamn problem without a meeting. But really, how do we get this done? Well, of course, you know that you have many tools and processes in your organizations, and it's not easy to just say, this is like the list, the comprehensive documentation of how to use all these tools and processes. So instead, I want to bring you another principle from the Agile Manifesto, and that is the principle of simplification. Simplification has a very distinct meaning in the Agile Manifesto, and it's actually the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. So when you focus on the tools and processes that you have, you can see it as simplifying by removing tools and processes from your stack. And I want to take you back here and tell you that simplification is choosing only one essential tool for these 3 areas. For communication, choose one tool. For work management, choose one tool. And for documentation, choose only one tool. Of course, video conferencing is good. I'm not saying don't do video conferences, but be mindful of how much of it you do, because your attention span is so much less than when you are in a physical environment. In a physical environment, you see a much broader span. You see different environments during your day. But in an online working, in a remote working, you are only staring at the screen in front of you, and you can get exhausted if you have too many online meetings during your day. So important, do not replicate the office. Choose the right type of communication for the purpose that you're trying to achieve. I divide communication in 2 different categories: synchronous communication and asynchronous communication. Synchronous communication applies to decision-making, resolving conflicts, quick synchronization, collaborative problem-solving, socializing, and celebration, coaching. And asynchronous applies to sharing information, or presenting data and findings, or sharing and gathering ideas and opinions, or gathering data of any kind. So be careful what way of communication you're choosing for what purpose. And the last one for asynchronous is sequential collaboration. For example, creating a document and adding stuff to that document as it is being created. Working software over comprehensive documentation is value number 2 on the Agile Manifesto. And I think one of the challenges that comes with that is that we have meetings, and more meetings, and we end up creating non-working I'm going to take you through this. It's a weird slide, but I'm going to just take you through it. So here's the thing. We first meet to create a product vision, roadmap, and product backlog. Then we meet to make the changes to the product vision and backlog. Then we continuously reprioritize those plans that we have made. And then we update the status about that in a tool every day. Then we also need to tell each other that we have changed the status, and we talk about it on a daily basis. We use chat and comments in our tools to communicate. Somehow, despite how much we meet and communicate and synchronize, our architecture in the software keeps getting worse, and we keep introducing more bugs. Well, it could be because we don't have enough time to write test code, but we do have our continuous integration pipeline, so there's that. We sometimes must have code freeze or releases to do some more integration testing, yet our software keeps crashing often. What's penetrating testing? Security? Oh yeah, right, I don't know who takes care of that in our organization. But we have very valuable retrospective meetings. We keep improving our processes. Our action points are usually, let's have a meeting to improve the way we run one of our meetings, such as planning. But it's really difficult to do anything because we are a distributed team in different time zones. It all comes down to blaming remote working. And we end up creating non-working software and no documentation. Pretty sad, isn't it? Well, once again, to overcome this challenge, stop trying to copy the collocated behavior. You must think and behave differently. If you want your remote working to work, if you want to have working software over comprehensive documentation, you need to invest in your ops, you need to invest in your CI, you need to invest in your security, your automation, and you need to create just enough documentation and make your meetings valuable with the ways that I have already told you about. Enough documentation can be comments in your code. Enough documentation can be the comments that you put in your task management tool. Enough documentation can be very simple release notes that you can create for your users to consume just the gist of what you have delivered to them. The next one that we want to talk about, the next value in Agile, is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. It is all about doing precisely what the user asks and creating a balance between that and assuming that you know what's best and ignoring the user. Creating that balance is not necessarily an easy thing to do. That is why we need to collaborate with our customer. Challenge number 3 comes from the fact that we keep collecting a lot of feedback and we end up creating a lot of contracts with our customers, and we value that over collaborating with our customer. So how do we overcome this challenge? Customer collaboration should be valued over contract negotiation. It's important to remember that collaboration is not the goal. It's merely a means to a goal. Organizations do not collaborate. It is people within those organizations that need to collaborate. Work together with your customer instead of making SLAs and fix the scope, fixed deadline contracts. Define your goal together with the customer and achieve it together with the customer. Try to gather valuable feedback from the customer instead of random surveys that you send out and get from your users that do not necessarily end up impacting your decisions about the product. Instead, try to get into meaningful conversations with your users. And of course, experiment and learn. And here's the last one of the Agile values: responding to change over following a plan. This is shown beautifully as we are living in the middle of this chaos that our world is suddenly in. Well, remote work has been the reality of our work for a few years now. So how come some companies are just suddenly remote? Andy Singleton said it a few years ago when he said, Technology is not making distributed teams more like collocated teams. It's making everyone else more like distributed teams. I think it's another way of saying what I've been saying to you. Do not replicate the office. You need to think and behave differently, fundamentally differently, about communication. So to overcome this challenge, you need to stop responding to change by doing the exact same thing. Of course, it is human nature not to seek out a replacement until you need one. And I think many of you guys suddenly need a solution. Well, ask yourself, do you really need to work a certain way? Do you actually need to pair program to solve that problem? Or is it possible to do it differently? Reflect and adjust your ways of working. And do things differently. Do not replicate the office. Of course, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this presentation is this: do not replicate the office. More meetings or chats would not magically solve the problem of your ineffective communication. When working remotely, you must fundamentally change the way you think about communication. Invest in learning the mindset and skill set for remote work. If you just wing it, you might end up harming your organization and your business more than you want. What are the most common mistakes when someone moves to remote or agile practice other than replicating the office? It is actually the most common to call for too many meetings. The most common mistake that a lot of people make is what we actually just did over here, which is very interesting. We sat quietly in front of the camera as everyone typed in some information. And I think that that part of information gathering, that part of data gathering, which exists in a lot of our Agile ceremonies and Agile events, could be done asynchronously. For example, if you're going to have a retrospective session, you know that the first step of the retrospective session is gathering data about the previous sprint. That part could be done during the sprint, continuously, like every day. People could log into a tool that you have and enter their data, so that when you sit in a synchronized meeting, when you are exchanging information in real time, you have the data gathered already, and people don't need to sit in front of the camera quietly in an awkward setup and keep typing. And that kind of like feels, when you do that, when you gather data asynchronously, the feeling that people get in the meeting is that the meetings are shorter and they're so much more focused and to the point, which contributes to not feeling exhausted for having too many meetings in an online environment. So that's the most common mistake that I see. And another one that I see is related to code quality. So one of the things that people do is that a lot of people who are working in smaller companies, especially, they're very used to like going to their colleague and asking them to look at their code. Some companies do not have formal pull requests or do not have formal processes for code reviews. And one of the things that gets forgotten immediately when people go suddenly remote is exactly that they feel like because a person is not near them, they can't bother them for code review. And because chatting becomes a little cumbersome and people like take all of their conversations into a chat, it becomes too much information in one place, and they forget about actually implementing formal processes for code reviews, like having pull requests. So I hope that those top two are answering your questions. If so, I think I'll just go to the next question. Where do you think remote work will be in a year? What permanent shifts do you think will happen? Oh, that's a deep philosophical question. I think that in a year from now, actually, this is like from what I have learned about the virus and the pandemic that's going on, I think that within a year, we still won't have the vaccine and we still would be in a pretty terrible situation. And because of the economy that would crash, I think remote work is going to be even more ubiquitous. And I think many more people will join the movement and start working remotely. So if you are investing in yourself and learning the skills, you're doing a great thing. So the permanent shifts that I think would happen are actually in the world of management and leadership, which have been the most resistant to remote work over the last decade. And I think we will have a lot more buy-in from the top management of many of the larger companies to provide the opportunity for people to work remotely. And that goes along with a lot of policies that I think would change about insurances, about sick leaves, about providing, the infrastructure that people need to get their work done remotely. So I'm pretty positive about the changes that are going to happen, actually. And I'm going to go to the next question now. Working remote is now our way of life. When changing the way we think about communication, what are some tips on making that change? Oh, that's a very, very good question. Some tips about making that change when you think about communication differently. So I did talk to you about the differentiation between synchronous and asynchronous communication. It is really important to also acknowledge that people consume information in different styles and they learn in different styles. So you probably are familiar with how some people learn by looking at visuals, some people learn by listening to audio, some people are more tactile. And one of the things that we need to remember is that when you are communicating information, you need to remember to give information to people the way they learn. And if you haven't learned that about the individuals that you work with, try to make sure that you have all the aspects covered. Like one of the things that you guys probably have not noticed in my presentation is that I always make my presentations colorblind friendly, because I know that some people are colorblind and they're looking at the visuals and they may not get that same information that a non-colorblind person would get. But I also try to include my face and my audio for those who might just want to look away and listen to my voice. So it is true that I do put some text and some imagery on my on the slides that I'm communicating, but I also make sure that people who learn in an auditory way have that opportunity. Now, when I create workshops, I also make sure that there is a tactile version. Like I always ask people to have a notebook and a pen, and I give them exercises so that those people who learn through touch can also be included and learn. So I think the main thing about changing our mindset about communication is, of course, it's which one to use for which purpose. That is like the main theme is if you're gathering data, do it asynchronously. If you're making decisions, do it synchronously. But also make sure that you're communicating in the way that people want to be communicated with, in the way that they are ready to absorb the information. I hope that answers your question. The next question is, what about people who feel like they need personal physical interaction with teams to be effective? Work styles are unique for every person. That is absolutely true. There are so many ways to create social interaction in a team. I know that many of you have started using chat, even if you didn't use it before. One of the very simple tips that you can take away and implement is to have one or several chat channels for fun, just for socializing. You can even have like a standing event in your calendars, in your team calendars, and call it Friday coffee or something like that, and just have it there and show up and talk about anything that's not work. So don't forget the socializing part, because if you do not socialize with other people, you might actually lose your motivation over time. But for doing the work itself, be yourself and be humorous. Like if you're writing comments in your task management tool, don't shy away from showing your personality. There is nothing wrong with using emojis. You know that when kids today are kids yesterday and last year when we weren't forced to work remotely, when they communicate with each other, they are so comfortable using chat, using emojis, using written language. And if that is the case, we adults should also do the same thing. So you can learn from them and basically communicate exactly as who you are. But yeah, as I said, like, do not forget the socializing aspect. You need to be deliberate about it, because water cooler conversations are not going to happen by default. They're not going to happen on their own. You actually need to make sure that you create the opportunity for them to happen. In case you're using Slack, there is a really cool tool that you can use. There is an app called Donut that you can install on your Slack workspace, and it randomly pairs people up to just meet up and talk to each other. So it creates that serendipity that you might have in an office. You might just run into the head of marketing to whom you would never normally speak, and you just show up and have your cup of coffee or cup of tea and communicate. So those are the opportunities that you need to create together and deliberately. So be deliberate, that's the key. Next question, it says, can we go over more tips to avoid long meetings when we're at a startup and things change fast and you need to discuss information? That's a really good question. In a startup environment, a lot of the work that you guys do is unfortunately firefighting. So one of the things that I can do is to actually set aside some time and to create a proper balance between what aspects of your product development is going to be firefighting, is going to be responsive and reactive, and which aspects of it is actually having to do with creating a proper roadmap for your product or creating the long-term vision of your company and your product. And make sure that you create a balance between the two. If you're always in a firefighting mode, you will not have time to create a sustainable, maintainable product. And if you're always focused on creating a sustainable and maintainable product, you will not be able to respond to your users and to the changing market properly. So having long meetings is not necessary, especially when you're working remote. Instead, what you can do is to create deliberate documents. I don't know if you guys are going to be seeing David Hansen's talk in this conference, but he has written, or his company, Basecamp, they have written a really interesting and comprehensive guide that talks about how writing long texts is preferred to having a lot of chats or having long meetings and having real-time conversation. So I think I focused enough on this presentation about the importance of not falling back to needing real-time communication, but instead thinking about what aspects of conveying information can be done asynchronously and what aspects of it absolutely needs to be in real time. Just ask yourself, what am I going to achieve? What is the tangible outcome that I'm going to take out of this meeting? And then respond to the question, which parts of it can we do asynchronously before the meeting so that we can keep the meetings focused to the point and get real value from them. And of course, if you can, bring someone to facilitate your conversations. Do not assume that you know how to do facilitation. Get help from a professional facilitator, see the difference, and then you'll know. In remote working, in remote meetings, preparation is key. It is super important to do as much preparation as possible. Sometimes I spend as long a time as the actual meeting to just prepare the meeting and make sure that we're all on track and we're all actually ready to have the decision that needs to be made. I don't know if I have time. Shannon, are you there? I think we are actually out of time now.
We are. We're just at 10:40 now. So I need to exit the room, but you guys are welcome to stick around if you have time to answer more questions. Molood, you've all got the Thought Exchange up on your own devices, so I can leave you and let you go through the next few.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you guys for attending, and I actually have to go now, so I can't stay on, but to stay in touch with me, and if I haven't answered your questions, just ask me and I will answer to you asynchronously. Thank you for being here with me.